The rhythmic, heavy grinding of rusted iron gears was the only sound that filled the hollow interior of the abandoned clock tower, a skeletal relic of Busan's industrial past that now served as a temporary fortress for the most hunted duo in the Republic. The pre-dawn light was a bruised purple, filtering through the massive, grime-streaked glass faces of the clock, casting long, serrated shadows of Roman numerals across the floor. Kaelen, the architect. Wu sat cross-legged on the cold stone, the blue light of his tablet illuminating a face etched with the deep, hollow shadows of total exhaustion. His fingers moved with a ghostly tremor over the glass, managing the final stages of the 5 billion data drop that would effectively decapitate the minister's shadow regime. Across the room, Sloane stood by an arched window, her silhouette a sharp, unyielding blade against the dying neon of the Busan skyline. She didn't move. She didn't even seem to breathe. She was a statue of predatory intent, her eyes fixed on the gray labyrinth of the streets below. "The upload is at 92%, Kaelen whispered, his voice cracking from hours of silence and recycled air. "Once it hits 100, the minister's $5 billion empire becomes public domain. Every offshore account, every bribe, every shell company, it all goes live on the global blockchain." He looked up, seeking some form of validation from the woman who had kept him alive through the fire and the rain. Sloane didn't answer immediately. She was staring at a silent, matte black van idling 3 blocks away, tucked into the shadows of a collapsed warehouse. No lights, no plates, no radio signature. It was a hole in the world that she knew shouldn't be there. Suddenly, her secure comms piece chirped, a high-pitched, distorted frequency that signaled a localized intercept. Her eyes narrowed to slits. "Kaelen," she said, her hand moving with a fluid, terrifying economy to the small of her back. "Who else did you give the encryption handshake to? Who has the digital key to this tower's location?" Kaelen froze, his heart skipping a beat against the $5 billion drive in his vest. "Just my contact at the ministry," he stammered, the logic that usually governed his mind beginning to fray at the edges. "Director Choi? He's the one who helped me freeze the funds in the first place. He's been my inside man for 5 years. Why?" Sloane turned, the cold realization hitting her like a physical blow, her expression harder than the iron gears surrounding them. "Because that van isn't the minister's tactical team," she said, grabbing him by the collar and shoving him toward the service stairs, just as a needle-thin red laser dot appeared on the back of his dark hoodie. "It's yours. Choi didn't help you freeze the money out of a sense of justice, architect. He did it so he could sell the location of the man holding the keys to the highest bidder." The world exploded in a shower of ancient glass and iron splinters. A high-caliber sniper round shattered the Roman numeral VIs on the clock face, the percussion of the shot echoing through the tower like a thunderclap. Sloane didn't wait for the second round. She threw Kaelen into the darkness of the stairwell, her own weapon barking 3 times in rapid succession toward the warehouse 3 blocks away. This was the beginning of the Safehouse Betrayal, the moment where the $32,000 contract and the $5 billion secret collided with the one thing Kaelen's math couldn't account for: human greed. "I told you, architect," Sloane hissed as they descended the rattling metal stairs. "The only person who can't betray you is a dead one." They reached the middle landing just as the thermal sensors on Kaelen's tablet flared a blinding white. 6 heat signatures entering the base of the tower. Kaelen gasped, his lungs burning. "They're not using the doors. They're using breaching charges." As if on cue, the floor beneath them buckled with a muffled thump, followed by the acrid smell of C4 and the hiss of flashbang grenades. Sloane didn't panic. She leaned over the railing and dropped 2 smoke canisters, turning the stairwell into an opaque gray void. "Stay on my heel," she commanded. "If you lose sight of my jacket, you're a dead man." They moved through the smoke like ghosts, Sloane navigating by instinct, while Kaelen clutched the $5 billion drive as if it were the only thing keeping him grounded in a world that had just turned inside out. The attackers weren't the cleaners they had faced in the Somyeon district. These were mercenaries, hired guns with no insignias, moved by the $100 million bounty Director Choi had likely placed on Kaelen's head. They moved with a reckless aggression that was far more dangerous than the disciplined tactics of the state. As they reached the ground floor, a mercenary stepped out of the smoke, his shotgun leveled at Kaelen's chest. Sloane didn't even look. She spun, her boot connecting with the man's wrist in a sickening crunch before she drove her elbow into his temple. She was a whirlwind of surgical erasure, her movements so fast they seemed to blur the edges of Kaelen's vision. She grabbed the shotgun as the man fell and handed it to Kaelen. "Start acting like a target that bites back, or we aren't making it to the harbor." Kaelen took the heavy weapon, the weight of it a jarring reality compared to the digital tools he was used to. "Choi? He was my friend," he whispered, the emotional weight of the betrayal finally sinking in. Sloane didn't offer sympathy. She kicked open a heavy iron side door, revealing a rain-slicked alleyway swarming with more black vans. "Friendship is just a variable in a deal that hasn't gone bad yet," she said. "The $5 billion changed the math for everyone, Kaelen. Your friend decided he liked the numbers on a bounty more than the numbers on a ledger." They sprinted toward the end of the alley, the air snapping with suppressed gunfire. Kaelen felt a round graze his shoulder, the heat of it searing through his hoodie, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. The upload was still running in the background of his tablet, currently sitting at 96%. They reached a parked sedan, another stolen vehicle Sloane had cached for an emergency. She hot-wired it in seconds while Kaelen provided a frantic, uncoordinated covering fire with the shotgun. The roar of the engine was a welcome symphony over the sounds of the hunt. As they tore out of the alleyway, Kaelen looked back at the clock tower. It was swarming with lights, a monument to the trust he had misplaced. "The upload," he panted, checking the tablet. "It's stalled. The signal is being jammed by a mobile unit in one of those vans." Sloane looked at the rearview mirror, where 3 sets of headlights were rapidly closing the distance. "Then we stop running and we take out the jammer. I'm tired of being the prey architect. It's time to show Choi what a $5 billion mistake looks like." She accelerated into the heart of the industrial docks, the cranes and shipping containers creating a labyrinth of steel and shadow. This was Sloane's element. A world where the lines between hunter and hunted were drawn in blood and grease. She took a sharp turn, skidding the car behind a stack of rusted containers and killed the engine. "Give me the shotgun," she said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper. "And stay with the tablet. When the signal clears, you finish that upload. Don't stop until the minister's world is in ashes." Kaelen watched as she vanished into the shadows, a ghost once again. He sat in the dark car, the $5 billion drive resting on his lap, watching the progress bar on his screen flicker at 97%. He could hear the heavy thud of boots on gravel, the bark of orders, and then the unmistakable, rhythmic sound of Sloane going to work. The battle in the docks was a symphony of violence that Kaelen could only experience through sound. The clack-clack of the shotgun, the metallic ring of a blade against a container, and the muffled cries of men who had underestimated the ghost of the world. He watched the signal strength on his tablet. 1 bar, 2 bars, then a sudden spike. "The jammer is down," he yelled into the dark. He hit the resume button, his breath hitched in his throat as the bar crept to 98%. This was it. The $5 billion secret was minutes away from becoming the truth that would burn a nation. But then, the driver's side window shattered. A hand reached in, grabbing Kaelen by the throat and dragging him out of the car. It was Choi. The director looked different than he had in the ministry halls. His suit was rumpled, his eyes wild with a desperate, frantic greed. "Give me the drive, Kaelen," he screamed, pinning Kaelen against the rusted steel of a container. "The minister is done anyway. Let me take the $5 billion and we can both disappear. I'll tell them you died in the tower." Kaelen looked at the man he had once called a friend, seeing only the hollow rot of a system that had finally collapsed. "The math doesn't work that way, Choi." Kaelen rasped, his hand reaching for the small, suppressed handgun Sloane had given him. "You can't buy your way out of the truth." He didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger, the muffled pop sounding small against the roar of the docks. Choi slumped to the ground, his eyes wide with a final silent realization. Kaelen stood over him for a second, the $5 billion drive still gripped in his other hand. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had finally learned the true cost of a secret. The tablet in the car chirped, a long, steady tone. He looked at the screen. Upload complete. 100%. Global broadcast active. Sloane appeared from the shadows, her jacket covered in soot and blood, but her eyes were clear. She looked at Choi's body, then at the tablet, and finally at Kaelen. The architect finally pulled the stone, she said, a trace of a grim smile touching her lips. The $5 billion deal is a headline on every continent now. The minister's regime is falling apart as we speak. Kaelen nodded, a profound sense of relief washing over him, followed by a crushing exhaustion. He had done it. He had taken the most powerful man in Busan and rendered him powerless with a single keystroke. But as he looked around the dark, rain-soaked docks, he knew their journey was far from over. "They'll still be looking for us," Kaelen said, his voice stronger now. Choi was just the first of the vultures. Sloane nodded, grabbing his arm and leading him toward a waiting boat at the edge of the pier. "Then we keep moving. We have the data, we have the truth, and now we have a city that's about to wake up in a very different world." As they stepped onto the boat and disappeared into the gray Busan fog, Kaelen Wu realized that the Safehouse Betrayal hadn't broken him, it had forged him. He was no longer a man of logic running from a hunt. He was a ghost in the making, and with Sloane at his side, he was ready to face whatever new world they had just created. The architect's legacy was written in the code, and the ghost's debt was being paid in full. The $5 billion was gone, but the fire they had started was just beginning to burn.